They thought the humans were bluffing. That was the first mistake. The second was believing that a species that had survived a death world would ever forget a debt. At the edge of Vosh territory, where the light of their star faded into the black silence between systems, something impossible happened. Space didn't tear. There was no flash, no warning, no dramatic burst of energy that sensors could easily detect. 47 human warships simply appeared. One moment, the border was empty. The next, it wasn't. They hung there in perfect stillness, dark shapes against darker space, as if they had always been there, waiting, watching, deciding. Vosh long-range sensors struggled to lock onto them. The readings were inconsistent, unstable, almost wrong. Energy signatures fluctuated in ways that defied standard models. Some ships appeared cold, almost inert. Others pulsed with restrained power, like predators coiled just before a strike. For several seconds, no one on the Vosh monitoring station spoke. Then the alerts began, first quietly, then all at once. Unidentified fleet at border coordinates. 47 vessels confirmed. No known registry matches. Signal requests incoming encrypted. The station commander stared at the display, his crystalline form flickering with unease. 47 ships was not an invasion force. Not by any rational standard. The Vosh Concordat alone could mobilize 10 times that number within hours. And yet, no one moved to dismiss the threat. Because of what those ships represented. Because of where they came from. Because of who they belonged to. Humans, one of the analysts whispered, as if saying the word too loudly might provoke something. The chamber grew colder, not physically. Vosh did not experience temperature the way organic species did, but in that intangible way that signaled danger. Instinct, buried deep in their otherwise logical minds, began to whisper a warning that no data model could fully explain. Humans had not been seen beyond their own system in nearly 3 centuries. 300 years of silence. 300 years of isolation. 300 years for the galaxy to forget exactly what they were. Or worse, to remember, but choose to ignore it. "Open a channel," the commander ordered, though his voice carried less certainty than usual. "Identify their intent." There was a pause, not because the order was unclear, but because no one was eager to be the one who spoke first. Still, protocol demanded action. The communications officer complied. "Channel open." For a heartbeat, there was nothing, just static. Then the screen flickered. A human appeared. She stood in a dimly lit command center, surrounded by displays that the Vosh systems could barely interpret. Her posture was relaxed, almost casual, but there was something in her eyes that immediately drew attention. Something steady, something unyielding, something dangerous. When she spoke, her voice was calm. Too calm. "This is Ambassador and Brooks of the Earth Defense Fleet." No introduction, no diplomatic courtesy, no acknowledgement of Vosh authority, just a statement, just presence. "We are here to have a conversation." The words were simple, but the way she said them made it clear this was not a request. Across the station, multiple officers exchanged uneasy glances. Conversations in galactic terms did not usually begin with an unannounced fleet appearing at your border. The commander straightened, forcing composure back into his tone. "You have entered sovereign space without clearance," he replied. "State your purpose and withdraw your vessels to a safe distance." For a moment, and Brooks said nothing. She simply looked at him, not with confusion, not with anger, but with the kind of quiet focus one might give a problem that had already been solved. Behind her, one of the human officers leaned closer, speaking softly, too softly for Vosh systems to fully translate. She listened, nodded once, then returned her attention to the screen. "We will not be withdrawing," she said. No hesitation, no escalation in tone, just certainty. The commander felt something unfamiliar ripple through his thoughts. Not fear. Vash did not experience fear in the way organic species did, but something adjacent to it. Something like recognition. These actions are highly irregular. He pressed. If this is a diplomatic matter, proper channels. This is not a diplomatic matter, and interrupted. Still calm, still controlled, but now there was something else beneath it. A weight, the kind that came from decisions already made, the kind that could not be undone. Silence settled over the station again, thicker this time. One of the analysts began pulling archived data. Old records, fragmented intelligence reports, scattered mentions of human behavior during their early expansion period. Most of it had been classified as outdated, irrelevant. Until now, patterns began to reemerge. Conflicts that ended too quickly, enemies that underestimated them, outcomes that did not align with predicted probabilities. The analyst's glow dimmed. "Commander," he said quietly, "we should escalate this to the council." The commander hesitated, not because he disagreed, but because doing so meant acknowledging something he did not want to admit. That 47 ships might be enough. That this situation was already beyond standard containment. That whatever this conversation was, it mattered. More than it should. On the screen. And Brooks remained perfectly still, as if she had all the time in the universe. As if she knew exactly how this would unfold. And perhaps most unsettling of all, as if she had done this before. The commander made his decision. "Signal the council," he ordered. "Priority escalation." Across the system, messages began to ripple outward, faster than any physical vessel could travel. Alerts reached military hubs, political chambers, intelligence archives. The Vash Concordat was waking up, and at its border, 47 human warships waited in absolute silence. They did not advance. They did not retreat. They did not repeat their demand. They simply remained, watching, like something patient, like something certain, like something that did not need to prove its power, because it already knew. The first reports reached the inner systems within minutes. By the time the council assembled, every major node in Vash space was already analyzing the same impossible data. 47 human warships, holding position, not requesting entry, not issuing demands, not behaving in any way that matched established diplomatic or military doctrine, which, in itself, was the problem, because humans had never followed doctrine. The council chamber filled with shifting light as representatives phased into the central network. Crystalline bodies refracted across the polished surfaces, each one carrying the authority of a civilization that had stood unchallenged for centuries. At the center, Supreme Coordinator Vesh formed fully, his structure stabilizing into sharp, controlled symmetry. "Report," he said. A military advisor stepped forward, projecting the sensor data into the chamber. 47 vessels confirmed. Composition unknown. Energy signatures inconsistent with standard models. They are holding exactly 1 light minute outside our territorial boundary. "Only 47, one of the council members asked, a faint edge of disbelief in their tone. "Yes." A pause followed, because by every measurable metric, that number was insignificant. The Vash Concordat maintained hundreds of warships across multiple systems. Entire armadas could be mobilized within hours. Defensive grids alone could overwhelm a fleet several times that size. And yet, no one laughed. No one dismissed it, because the number wasn't what mattered. The origin was. Humans have not deployed beyond their system in 300 years, another council member noted. Their sudden appearance suggests intent. Intent does not equal capability, Vesh replied sharply. We have superior numbers, superior technology, and established control of this region. A small expeditionary force does not constitute a threat. The military advisor hesitated. Then, carefully, Our intelligence archives suggest otherwise. That drew attention. Ancient records were not often referenced. The Vosh valued current data, predictive modeling, efficiency. Old information was typically considered obsolete, unless it wasn't. Clarify, Vesh demanded. The advisor expanded the display. Old battle reports appeared, fragmented, incomplete, drawn from encounters long buried in the Concordat's history. The Trillion border conflict, the advisor began. 287 years ago, the Trillion deployed a fleet of 300 ships against a human force of less than 100. That was a different era, Vesh interrupted. Primitive warfare, outdated tactics. They lost in 6 hours, the advisor continued. Silence. More data appeared. Additional engagements show similar patterns. Human fleets operating below expected capacity, achieving disproportionate results. Statistical anomalies, Vesh said, though his tone had tightened. Repeated anomalies, the advisor corrected. Another council member shifted, their crystalline form dimming slightly as they processed the implications. What about their technology? They asked. We have had 3 centuries to advance. Surely any advantage they once held is obsolete. The advisor hesitated again, then answered, We do not know. That, more than anything, unsettled the chamber. The Vosh Concordat did not operate on uncertainty. Every system, every species, every potential threat had been categorized, analyzed, and reduced to predictable variables. Humans had not, because humans had disappeared, withdrawn into their own system, ignored the council, ignored trade, ignored diplomacy. For 300 years, they had done nothing. And in doing nothing, they had become unknown. Then we assumed the worst, one of the elders said quietly. All attention shifted to them. They were one of the oldest minds present, a keeper of long-term records, a being who had observed the galaxy across cycles most others only studied. You assume too much, Vesh replied. A species that isolates itself for centuries does not emerge stronger. It stagnates, it weakens, or it prepares, the elder said. That hung in the air, uncomfortable, unprovable, possible. Vesh dismissed it with a sharp motion. We will not indulge in speculation. We will respond according to established protocol. He turned to the communications channel. They claim they are here for a conversation, he continued. Then we will treat this as a diplomatic incident until proven otherwise. Several council members shifted uneasily. Should we not mobilize the fleet? One asked. Vesh's structure sharpened. Mobilization implies threat. Threat implies fear. We will not project weakness based on incomplete data. A pause. Then, reluctantly, the chamber settled. Because despite the uncertainty, the logic was sound. 47 ships did not justify panic. 47 ships could not threaten the Concordat. And yet, even as the Council returned its focus to procedure, smaller processes ran beneath the surface. Quiet orders, subtle shifts, background systems activating. Not officially, not openly, but they happened. Shipyards increased output. Defense grids adjusted calibration. Long-range sensors focused more precisely on the border, just in case, because logic said one thing, but instinct, rare, unwelcome, difficult to quantify, said something else entirely. At the edge of their space, the human fleet remained unchanged. No movement, no escalation, no further communication. Just 47 ships, holding position with unnatural precision, as if they were not waiting for permission, as if they were not concerned with response time, as if the outcome of this situation had already been decided and they were simply allowing the Vosh time to realize it. The first mention of the Kari did not come from the military. It came from the archives, buried beneath centuries of data, flagged as irrelevant, categorized under extinct or declining species. The records had not been accessed in decades. There had been no reason to. The Curry were not a political force. They held no territory of value. They posed no threat. They were fading. That was the official term. A slow, natural decline, genetic instability, population collapse over generations. Tragic, but not uncommon. The galaxy had seen it before. Species rose, species fell. The Council observed, documented, and moved on. That was the order of things. But as analysts began cross-referencing the sudden appearance of humans with historical anomalies, the Curry records resurfaced. At first, it was just a correlation, a faint one. Humans had vanished from galactic affairs around the same time the Curry began to decline. Not exactly the same year, but close enough to raise a question. Then more connections emerged. Trade logs, medical exchanges, old diplomatic entries. The deeper they looked, the clearer the pattern became. The humans had known the Curry, not casually, not distantly, closely, very closely. What is this? One of the analysts asked, projecting a recovered file into the shared network. The image that appeared was old, degraded at the edges, but still intact enough to interpret. A vessel, massive, damaged, its hull fractured in multiple sections, entire compartments vented to space. Emergency lights flickered across its surface, weak and failing. Designation, Endless Dawn. Curry origin, status, critical. Attached to the file was a transmission, audio only, distorted, but still readable. Reactor containment failing, life support collapsing. We cannot hold much longer. A pause, static, then another voice, steadier, though no less strained. Earth will survive. The analysts slowed the playback, replayed it. Earth, someone repeated. More files opened, more fragments aligned 300 years ago. Before their isolation, humanity had been struggling. Their world was classified as a death world, a term used for planets where environmental conditions alone could destroy most known species. Extreme weather, predators, disease, instability. Survival was not guaranteed. Progress was difficult. And at some point, something had gone wrong, catastrophically wrong. The records were incomplete, but the pattern was clear enough. A planetary-level crisis, infrastructure failure, population collapse imminent. Humanity had been on the edge of extinction. And then, the Curry arrived, not as conquerors, not as opportunists, but as rescuers. They had diverted a colony vessel, one carrying over 50,000 of their own, to assist a species that offered them nothing in return. The Endless Dawn. It had not been designed for rescue operations. It had not been equipped for prolonged atmospheric stabilization, but they used it anyway. They burned out its systems. They overloaded its core. They pushed it far beyond operational limits to buy humanity time. Time to stabilize. Time to rebuild. Time to survive. And when it was over, the Curry ship never left orbit. Final transmission logs filled the display. Containment breach unavoidable. Structural integrity failing. Tell them. Static consumed most of the message. Then faintly, live. The file ended. No survivors. 50,000 Curry. Gone. Silence filled the analysis chamber. Even the most logic-driven minds struggled to process it. Not the event itself. Sacrifice was not unheard of. But the scale, the intent, the complete absence of self-preservation. Why would they do that? One analyst asked. There was no immediate answer, because within Vosh logic, such an action did not align with rational behavior. You did not risk your entire population for another species. You did not sacrifice tens of thousands of lives for a civilization that might not even survive. You calculated. You optimized. You ensured your own continuation first. That was the natural order. That was how the galaxy functioned. Except, apparently, not for everyone. More data appeared. Human records this time, recovered from early transmissions before their isolation. Memorial logs. Names. Thousands of them. Every single Kari who had died was recorded, remembered, honored. The list scrolled endlessly. 50,000 individuals. Not statistics. Not losses. People. The analysts slowed the scroll. There were messages attached. Human messages. Simple. Unpolished. But repeated over and over again. We will remember. We will not forget. We owe you everything. The chamber grew quiet, because suddenly the presence of the human fleet at the border made sense. Not strategically, not politically, emotionally, and that was far more dangerous. A new file opened automatically, triggered by the correlation algorithms. Recent, very recent, recovered from intercepted human transmissions, just hours before their arrival. The voice was the same one now, speaking from the border. Ambassador and Brooks. Confirmation received, she said. The data is verified. A pause. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. Still controlled, but colder. Heavy genetic degradation across the Kari population. Pattern consistent with engineered pathogen. Silence on the line. Then another voice. What are you saying? Another pause. Longer this time. As if the words themselves required restraint. I'm saying this wasn't natural. Anne replied. The transmission crackled slightly. I'm saying someone did this to them. The file ended there. No speculation. No accusation. Just a conclusion. Back in the present, the analysts exchanged silent signals. The Kari had not been fading. They had been killed. Slowly, carefully, deliberately. And now, the humans knew. Across Vosh space, systems continued to process the implications. The fleet at the border. The silence. The refusal to follow protocol. It was no longer an anomaly. It was an answer. 47 ships had not come for negotiation. They had not come for diplomacy. They had come for something else entirely. And for the first time since the initial alert, the Vosh began to understand exactly what kind of conversation the humans were here to have. The Council did not panic. That was not how the Vosh functioned. Even as the truth began to settle into their systems, uncomfortable, disruptive, impossible to ignore, they did what they always did. They analyzed. They compartmentalized. They searched for alternatives. There is still no direct evidence linking the Concordat to this, one of the council members stated, projecting revised summaries into the chamber. The genetic degradation pattern is suggestive, but not conclusive. Suggestive, the elder repeated quietly. The data hovered between them. Sequences, breakdowns, artificial markers buried deep within the Kari genome. Too precise to be random, too subtle to be immediately detected. Designed not to kill quickly. Designed to erode, to weaken over generations, to ensure extinction would appear natural. It could be an unknown environmental factor, another voice added. A mutation cascade. There are precedents. There are no precedents for this level of precision, the elder replied. Silence followed, not because the argument was lost, but because it was inconvenient. Vesh stepped forward, his crystalline form sharpening as he took control of the discussion. What matters is not speculation, he said. What matters is what can be proven. He gestured, and the display shifted. The human fleet, still there, still waiting. They have made no formal accusation, he continued. No evidence has been presented to this council. No official grievance has been filed. His voice steadied, controlled, measured. This is not a legal matter. It is not a diplomatic dispute. It is a situation being driven by assumption. A few members brightened slightly at that, because assumption could be dismissed. Assumption could be challenged. Assumption could be controlled. Unlike truth, we respond accordingly, Vesh concluded. We deny involvement. We demand they withdraw. And if necessary, we remind them of the consequences of violating our space. The military advisor shifted. Coordinator, if their conclusion is correct. It is not confirmed. Vesh cut in. But if it is, then they are acting on incomplete data, Vesh snapped. And we will not validate that by reacting as though they are right. The chamber fell quiet again, not in agreement, but in acceptance, because the alternative required acknowledging something far worse, that the Concordat had not only committed genocide, but had done so in a way that was meant to go unnoticed. Perfect, clean, untraceable. Until now, Vesh turned back to the communications channel. "Reopen the link," he ordered. Moments later, the human signal returned, and Brooks appeared exactly as before. Same position, same expression, as if she had not moved at all, as if she had been standing there the entire time, waiting. Vesh did not waste time. "Ambassador Brooks," he began, his tone formal, precise. "The Vosh Concordat rejects any implication of wrongdoing. We are aware of your presence and your concerns. However, your conclusions appear to be based on incomplete or inaccurate data," and said nothing. Her eyes did not shift, did not narrow, did not react at all. "We have found no evidence of deliberate interference in the Curry decline," Vesh continued. "Their condition is consistent with natural genetic instability. While unfortunate, it is not uncommon among developing species." Still nothing. No interruption. No argument. No visible emotion. That, more than anything, unsettled him. "We advise you to withdraw your fleet," he finished. "Any further escalation will be interpreted as a hostile act against a council member species." The transmission hung there, waiting for a response, for a reaction, for something, and finally moved, just slightly, a breath. Then, "Are you finished?" she asked. The question was quiet, polite even, but it landed like impact. Vesh paused, just for a fraction of a second. "Yes," and nodded once. Then she turned her head slightly, speaking to someone off-screen. "Record that," she said. A voice in the background responded. "Already done." She looked back at Vesh, and for the first time, something changed. Not in her posture, not in her tone, but in her eyes. The calm was still there, but now it carried weight. Finality. 300 years ago, she said, the Curry gave up 50,000 lives to save ours. The chamber went completely still. They didn't ask what they would gain, she continued. They didn't calculate the cost. They didn't wait for permission. Each word was measured, deliberate. They saw a species in danger, and they chose to help. No one spoke. No one interrupted, because suddenly this was no longer a discussion. It was something else. We spent 3 centuries honoring that sacrifice, Anne said, remembering every name, every life, every moment they gave us. Her voice did not rise, did not harden, but it became heavier. And now we find out they've been dying, slowly, quietly, while the rest of the galaxy watched. A pause, not for effect, for control. For 300 years, she went on, no one asked why. The accusation hung in the air, unspoken, unavoidable. Then she leaned forward, just slightly. And now you're telling me it's natural. Vesh held his position, maintained his composure, because that was what leadership required, based on available data. That is the most probable. It's not natural. The interruption was soft, but absolute, and straightened again. We've already analyzed the genome, she said. We've already isolated the markers. We've already traced the origin pattern. Another pause. This one sharper, colder. We know exactly what was done. Across the chamber, several council members dimmed, because this was the moment, the shift from uncertainty to confirmation. Vesh did not respond immediately, because there was only one question left, and he already knew the answer. Then present your evidence, he said. Anne's expression didn't change. We will, she replied. A heartbeat passed. But that's not why we're here. The words settled like gravity, heavy, unavoidable. Vesh felt it then. that same unfamiliar sensation from earlier. Stronger now, closer to understanding, closer to realization. "Then why are you here?" he asked, and looked directly at him. No hesitation, no doubt, to see what you do next. Silence. Pure. Total. Because suddenly, the conversation wasn't about proof. It wasn't about denial. It wasn't about diplomacy. It was about choice. And for the first time since the humans arrived, the Vosh understood that whatever decision came next would not change what was about to happen. For a long moment, no one spoke. Not in the council chamber, not on the border station, not even within the human fleet. It was as if the entire system had paused, waiting, measuring, balancing something far larger than fleets or weapons. Choice. That was what Anne had given them. Not a demand. Not yet. A choice. And somehow, that made it worse. Vesh recovered first. Because he had to. Because leadership required it. "You are acting outside all recognized authority," he said, his voice regaining its precision. "Even if your claims were valid, which has not been formally established, you do not possess the jurisdiction to enforce consequences." And listened, still calm, still patient. "You are not a governing body," Vesh continued. "You are not a council member. You are not bound by interstellar law, nor are you protected by it. Any action you take will be considered unlawful aggression." A few council members brightened slightly at that, because this was familiar territory. Law, structure, framework, things that could be defined, controlled, used. "If you proceed," Vesh said, "you will be treated as a hostile force. Sanctions will follow. Military response will be authorized. You will isolate yourselves from the rest of the galaxy permanently." He finished, letting the weight of that settle. Consequences. Clear, logical, predictable, and took a slow breath. Then she nodded, not in agreement, in acknowledgement. "I understand," she said, and for a brief moment, it almost sounded like this could still be resolved, like the situation might return to something manageable. Something contained. Then she spoke again. "And we don't care." The words landed softly, but they hit harder than any threat. The chamber flickered. Not violently, but enough. Enough to show disruption. Law didn't save them. Anne continued. Her voice hadn't changed, but now it carried something deeper, something rooted. Treaties didn't save them. A step forward, barely noticeable, but intentional. The council didn't save them. Silence pressed in from all sides, because there was no counterargument ready, no prepared response. Just truth, uncomfortable, direct, unavoidable. "You had 300 years, she said. 300 years to notice that an entire species was dying in slow motion. Each word struck with quiet precision. You had access to their data. You had access to their systems. You had access to their people." A pause, long enough to feel, and you did nothing. No accusation in her tone, no anger, just fact. And somehow that was worse. Vesh held his form steady. "We cannot act on every decline," he replied. "The galaxy contains thousands of species. Resources must be allocated based on what benefits you." And said, again not loud, not aggressive, just correct. "That is how civilizations survive," Vesh countered, and tilted her head slightly, studying him, like he had just proven something. "Yes," she said, "that's how you survive." Another pause, shorter this time. "But that's not how you deserve to." The chamber dimmed. Several council members shifted uncomfortably, their internal processes struggling to reconcile the statement, because it didn't fit. It wasn't logical. It wasn't efficient. It wasn't how things worked. And yet, it resonated. Somewhere beneath the layers of calculation. Somewhere deeper. "You're right about one thing," Anne continued. "We're not part of your system." She gestured lightly around her, though she wasn't physically present in the chamber. We didn't sign your accords. We didn't agree to your rules. We didn't build our society around your version of order." Her gaze sharpened, just slightly, but we did learn something you forgot. Now the weight shifted, from explanation to definition. "When someone saves your life," she said, "you don't forget. When someone sacrifices everything for you, a breath, held, controlled, you don't let them die." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, full of implication, full of something none of the Vosh could reduce to numbers. Vesh tried, because that was what he did. "What you are proposing," he said carefully, "is not justice. It is retaliation, emotional, uncontrolled, destabilizing retaliation." And didn't react, didn't interrupt, didn't deny it. "Such behavior leads to chaos," he continued, "to endless cycles of violence, to collapse." Now she moved, just a fraction closer to the screen, and for the first time, there was something visible in her expression. Not anger, not rage, something colder, something far more dangerous. "No," she said quietly, "it leads to consequences." The word hung there, heavy, defined. "You call it chaos because it disrupts your system," she went on. "We call it accountability. Another step, closer, because if there are no consequences," she said, "then nothing matters." No one in the chamber spoke, because they understood now. Not completely, not comfortably, but enough. This wasn't about law. It wasn't about territory. It wasn't even about power. It was about something far simpler and far more absolute. "You made a choice," and said. Her voice softened again, not in mercy, in certainty. "You looked at a species that couldn't defend itself, and you decided it was acceptable for them to disappear." No denial came, no interruption, because the truth, whether acknowledged or not, was already present and straightened. The moment shifted again, from explanation to conclusion. "We're not here to debate that," she said. "We're not here to negotiate philosophy." Her eyes locked with Vesh, unmoving, unyielding. "We're here because you crossed a line, a pause, the kind that marks the end of something. And now," she finished quietly, "you're going to learn what that means." For a long moment, no one spoke. Not in the council chamber, not on the border station, not even within the human fleet. It was as if the entire system had paused, waiting, measuring, balancing something far larger than fleets or weapons. Choice. That was what, and had given them. Not a demand. Not yet. A choice. And somehow, that made it worse. Vesh recovered first. Because he had to. Because leadership required it. "You are acting outside all recognized authority," he said, his voice regaining its precision. "Even if your claims were valid, which has not been formally established, you do not possess the jurisdiction to enforce consequences." And listened, still calm, still patient. "You are not a governing body," Vesh continued. "You are not a council member. You are not bound by interstellar law, nor are you protected by it. Any action you take will be considered unlawful aggression." A few council members brightened slightly at that, because this was familiar territory. Law, structure, framework, things that could be defined, controlled, used. "If you proceed," Vesh said, "you will be treated as a hostile force. Sanctions will follow. Military response will be authorized. You will isolate yourselves from the rest of the galaxy permanently." He finished, letting the weight of that settle. Consequences. Clear, logical, predictable, and took a slow breath. Then she nodded, not in agreement, in acknowledgement. "I understand," she said, and for a brief moment, it almost sounded like this could still be resolved, like the situation might return to something manageable, something contained. Then she spoke again, "And we don't care." The words landed softly, but they hit harder than any threat. The chamber flickered, not violently, but enough to show disruption. Law didn't save them. And continued. Her voice hadn't changed, but now it carried something deeper, something rooted. Treaties didn't save them. A step forward, barely noticeable, but intentional. The council didn't save them. Silence pressed in from all sides, because there was no counterargument ready, no prepared response. Just truth, uncomfortable, direct, unavoidable. You had 300 years, she said. 300 years to notice that an entire species was dying in slow motion. Each word struck with quiet precision. You had access to their data. You had access to their systems. You had access to their people. A pause, long enough to feel, and you did nothing. No accusation in her tone, no anger, just fact, and somehow that was worse. Vesh held his form steady. We cannot act on every decline, he replied. The galaxy contains thousands of species. Resources must be allocated based on what benefits you. And said, again, not loud, not aggressive, just correct. That is how civilizations survive, Vesh countered, and tilted her head slightly, studying him, like he had just proven something. Yes, she said, that's how you survive. Another pause, shorter this time, but that's not how you deserve to. The chamber dimmed. Several council members shifted uncomfortably, their internal processes struggling to reconcile the statement, because it didn't fit. It wasn't logical. It wasn't efficient. It wasn't how things worked. And yet, it resonated, somewhere beneath the layers of calculation, somewhere deeper. You're right about one thing. And continued, we're not part of your system. She gestured lightly around her, though she wasn't physically present in the chamber. We didn't sign your accords. We didn't agree to your rules. We didn't build our society around your version of order. Her gaze sharpened, just slightly, but we did learn something you forgot. Now the weight shifted, from explanation to definition. When someone saves your life, she said, you don't forget. When someone sacrifices everything for you, a breath, held, controlled, you don't let them die. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, full of implication, full of something none of the Vosh could reduce to numbers. Vesh tried, because that was what he did. What you are proposing, he said carefully, is not justice. It is retaliation. Emotional, uncontrolled, destabilizing retaliation. And didn't react, didn't interrupt, didn't deny it. Such behavior leads to chaos, he continued, to endless cycles of violence, to collapse. Now she moved, just a fraction closer to the screen, and for the first time, there was something visible in her expression. Not anger, not rage, something colder, something far more dangerous. No, she said quietly. It leads to consequences. The word hung there, heavy, defined. You call it chaos because it disrupts your system, she went on. We call it accountability. Another step, closer, because if there are no consequences, she said, then nothing matters. No one in the chamber spoke, because they understood now. Not completely, not comfortably, but enough. This wasn't about law. It wasn't about territory. It wasn't even about power. It was about something far simpler and far more absolute. You made a choice, and said. Her voice softened again, not in mercy, in certainty. You looked at a species that couldn't defend itself, and you decided it was acceptable for them to disappear. No denial came, no interruption, because the truth, whether acknowledged or not, was already present. And straightened. The moment shifted again, from explanation to conclusion. We're not here to debate that, she said. We're not here to negotiate philosophy. Her eyes locked with Vesh, unmoving, unyielding. We're here because you crossed a line. A pause, the kind that marks the end of something. And now, she finished quietly, you're going to learn what that means. Phase 6. No one asked how much time they had, because everyone already understood that time had just become the most important thing in the system, and didn't raise her voice. She didn't shift her posture. She didn't need to. "We're going to make this simple," she said. The words were calm, measured, final. "You will surrender every individual involved in the development and deployment of the biological weapon." The chamber froze. Not metaphorically. Processes slowed. Signals lagged. Even the constant background hum of computation seemed to hesitate. "You will provide full access to all research data, all records, all command structures tied to this operation," she continued. "Nothing withheld. Nothing altered." Vesh stared at her, unblinking, unmoving, because now it was no longer a conversation. It was a demand. "You will do this within 12 hours. There it was. The line. Clear, defined, unavoidable. 12 hours. Across the chamber, calculations began instantly. Fleet mobilization times, defense readiness, probability trees, engagement outcomes, all of it running at once. All of it trying to answer the same question. Could they afford to refuse? "You presume authority you do not possess," Vesh said, though the edge in his voice had returned. "You issue demands as if you have already won." And shook her head slightly, not in disagreement, in correction. "No," she said. "I'm issuing terms before this gets worse." Silence followed, heavy, tight, because everyone understood what she meant. "What happens if we refuse?" one of the council members asked. The question slipped out before it could be filtered, before it could be refined, before it could be made diplomatic. It hung there, raw, necessary, and didn't answer immediately. She looked at them, at all of them, not just Vesh, the entire council, as if weighing something, not options, not outcomes, something else. Then she spoke. "If you refuse," she said quietly, "we come in." No elaboration, no dramatic emphasis, just fact. "We take what we need," she continued. "We dismantle anything that gets in our way." The words landed one by one, cold, precise, unavoidable, and you will not enjoy the process. A faint shift moved through the chamber. Not panic, not yet, but something closer now, something harder to ignore. "You are threatening a council member species," Vesh said. "Do you understand the scale of what you are initiating?" And met his gaze, without hesitation. Yes, that single word carried more weight than any speech, because there was no doubt in it, no hesitation, no uncertainty, just understanding and acceptance. A long pause stretched between them. Then Vesh straightened. "We will not comply with unlawful demands based on unverified accusations," he said. "You have 12 minutes to withdraw your fleet before we consider this an act of war." 12 minutes, not 12 hours. A counter, a test, a statement. The difference did not go unnoticed. And exhaled slowly, almost disappointed. Then she nodded once. Understood. She turned slightly, speaking to someone off-screen. "Mark the time." A voice responded immediately. "Timer set." She looked back at the council. 12 hours, she repeated. Not louder, not sharper, but somehow more final. "That's how long you have to make the right decision." The transmission cut. No farewell, no closing statement, just gone. For a moment, the council chamber remained frozen. Then everything moved at once. Mobilize the fleet. Activate all defensive grids. Bring all systems to full readiness. Orders overlapped. Signals cascaded outward. The Vosh Concordat shifted from observation to preparation in seconds. 600 warships began to power up across multiple systems. Shipyards accelerated deployment cycles. Weapons arrays recalibrated. Command structures aligned. Because whatever came next, it was no longer theoretical. At the edge of their space, the human fleet didn't move. Not even slightly. 47 ships, still, silent, waiting, inside the flagship Endless Dawn. Admiral Derek Stone stood at the center of the command deck, watching the timer count down. 12 hours, 11 hours 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. 11 hours 59 minutes, and 58 seconds. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Every person on that deck already knew what this meant. Not just a battle, not just a mission. A line had been drawn, and on the other side of it, there would be consequences. Derek clasped his hands behind his back, eyes fixed on the display. "Status," he said quietly. "All ships ready," the tactical officer replied. "Weapons hot. Targeting solutions prepared." "Good." Another second ticked away. Then another. The countdown didn't rush, didn't accelerate. It moved with steady, indifferent precision, giving the Vosh exactly what and had promised. Time. Time to think. Time to decide. Time to choose which version of the future they were about to face. Derek watched the numbers fall, unblinking, unwavering, because he already knew how this would end. And somewhere, far across the system, so did they. The timer reached 0. Nothing happened for exactly 1 second. And in that single second, the Vosh believed, just briefly, that perhaps this had been a bluff after all. That perhaps the humans would hesitate. That perhaps reason would prevail. That perhaps the first human ship moved. It didn't accelerate gradually. It didn't signal intent. It simply surged forward, crossing the boundary into Vosh space like a released spring. Then the rest followed. 47 ships, all at once. No formation change. No hesitation. Just a direct, relentless advance. "They're moving!" one of the Vosh commanders shouted, though every sensor in the system was already screaming the same thing. "Engage defensive protocols." Across the defensive perimeter, 600 Vosh warships activated in perfect synchronization. Shields flared to life. Targeting systems locked. Energy arrays charged with precise, controlled efficiency. This was how civilized warfare was conducted. Orderly, measured, predictable. Fire. Beams of coherent energy lanced across the void, converging on the incoming human fleet. Each shot was calculated to disable, not destroy. To neutralize threats while minimizing unnecessary loss. The first volleys struck. Light flared. Impact registered. And then, nothing changed. The human ships didn't slow, didn't scatter, didn't even adjust their course. They just kept coming. "Recalibrate targeting," the Vosh commander snapped. "Increase output. More beams, more power, more precision." The results were the same. Human hulls absorbed the strikes, armor glowing under the assault, but holding. Shields flickered, not elegant, not refined, but brutally effective. Redundant, layered, built to endure. "They're not maneuvering," another officer said, confusion creeping into their voice. "Why aren't they maneuvering?" "Because they didn't need to." The answer came seconds later. The humans opened fire. It didn't look like Vosh weaponry. There were no clean beams, no elegant arcs of energy. There was chaos. Missiles erupted from the human ships in dense swarms, dozens, hundreds of independent warheads streaking forward in erratic patterns. Vosh point defense systems reacted instantly, firing precise countermeasures. They intercepted some, not enough. The first impacts hit the defensive line. Explosions rippled through shields, overwhelming them not with precision, but with volume. At the same time, something else followed. Kinetic rounds, solid projectiles, accelerated to velocities that turned simple metal into devastating force. They didn't burn through shields. They punched through them, like they weren't even there. The first Vosh ship split open before its systems even registered the breach. "Impossible," someone began. Then the radiation hit. It spread invisibly at first. Then systems began failing. Sensors overloaded. Internal circuits fried. Entire ships went dark as lethal energy flooded through their defenses. Weapons long abandoned by the rest of the galaxy weapons considered too crude, too dangerous, too human. Within minutes, the perfectly ordered Vosh formation began to fracture. "Hold the line!" commanders shouted across multiple channels. "Maintain formation." But the humans didn't give them time. They didn't pause, didn't regroup, didn't reposition. They pressed forward, relentless, unstoppable. Their closing distance too fast. Human ships tore through the outer defensive ring, not bothering to slow for precision engagements. They flew straight into the formation, forcing close-quarters combat, where Vosh coordination began to break down. This wasn't how war was supposed to work. Not like this. Not at this speed. Not with this level of disregard. A Vosh cruiser attempted to intercept, angling directly toward an incoming human vessel. "Collision course detected," its pilot signaled. The human ship didn't veer, didn't retreat. At the last possible second, it fired its thrusters, sliding just out of the way, and unleashed a concentrated barrage at point-blank range. The Vosh cruiser's engines detonated instantly. It spun out of control, drifting helplessly as the battle surged past it. "They're using our movement against us. They're not following engagement patterns." "They don't have patterns," another voice shouted back. "They're adapting in real time." Across the battlefield, Vosh ships attempted to regroup, falling back toward secondary defensive positions. Reform at inner perimeter. Fall back and stabilize. The order never finished, because the humans were already there. They didn't chase. They anticipated, cutting off retreat paths, collapsing formations before they could reestablish. Every attempt at organized defense was met with overwhelming, immediate response. Within the first hour, 80 Vosh ships were gone, completely destroyed, not disabled, not drifting, gone. Human losses? 2. The numbers spread through the command network like a shockwave. "This is not sustainable," one advisor said, their structure flickering erratically. "We cannot maintain this rate of attrition." "Then change tactics." Vesh snapped, though even he could hear the strain in his own voice. But there were no tactics left to change, because everything they relied on, predictability, structure, control, was being dismantled in real time. Human ships moved like they didn't care about survival, like damage was expected, like loss was acceptable, as long as the objective was achieved. "They're not fighting to win," someone whispered. "They're fighting to end it." 6 hours in, the Vosh fleet broke. Not strategically, not orderly. It shattered. Ships fled in every direction, abandoning formation, abandoning coordination, abandoning everything that had once defined their superiority. Some tried to surrender. Signals broadcast across all frequencies. "We yield. Cease fire." But in the chaos, most of those transmissions went unanswered, because the humans weren't slowing. Not yet. Not until it was over. On the bridge of the endless dawn, Derek Stone watched the battlefield unfold in silence. "Status?" he asked. "Enemy fleet collapsing," the tactical officer replied. 70% losses confirmed. Remaining ships are retreating or non-operational. Derek nodded once. No satisfaction. No celebration. Just confirmation. "Signal all units," he said. "Cease fire on any vessel broadcasting surrender." A pause. Continue disabling all remaining military targets. Orders relayed instantly. Across the battlefield, human ships adjusted. Not stopping, not retreating, but shifting focus. From destruction to control. The war was already decided. Now it was just a matter of finishing it. 600 ships had stood at the beginning. A wall, an unbreakable defense. 6 hours later, there was nothing left of it but drifting wreckage and silent space. And through it, the human fleet continued forward, untouched, unstoppable, heading straight for the heart of Vosh territory, because the battle had never been the goal. It had only been the beginning. By the time the human fleet reached the Vosh home world, there was nothing left to stop them. No defensive line, no coordinated resistance, no illusion of control, only silence, orbit filled with debris, fragments of what had once been a fleet that believed itself untouchable. Broken hulls drifted slowly, reflecting the distant light of their star like scattered glass. And through that graveyard, the human ships arrived. They didn't rush, didn't charge like before. This time they slowed, deliberate, controlled. 47 warships spreading out across orbital space, positioning themselves with quiet precision. Below them, the Vosh home world turned, unchanged, untouched. Cities still glowed across its surface. Civilian transport routes remained active. Life continued, unaware or unwilling to fully comprehend what had just been lost above them. "They're in position," the tactical officer reported. Admiral Derek Stone stood with his hands behind his back, eyes fixed on the planetary display. "Target grid?" he asked. "Locked," came the response. "All military installations identified. Shipyards, command centers, weapons facilities confirmed." Derek nodded once. No hesitation. "Begin strikes." There was no dramatic countdown, no warning broadcast, just action. From orbit, human weapons deployed, not in chaotic swarms this time, but with surgical precision. Missiles descended through the atmosphere, adjusting course mid-flight, splitting into smaller payloads as they approached their targets. The first impacts were clean, controlled. A shipyard complex erupted into fire, its structure collapsing inward as critical systems failed simultaneously. A weapons facility followed, disabled in seconds, its power core neutralized before it could destabilize. Across the planet, military infrastructure vanished one target at a time. No wide-scale destruction, no random devastation. Every strike had purpose. Every impact was calculated. "They're not hitting population centers," one of the Vosh observers reported from below, their voice unsteady. "They're avoiding them." Of course they were. On the endless dawn, Derek watched as the targeting display updated in real time. Green markers flickered across the surface, each one a completed objective. Red markers remained, fewer with every passing minute. "Adjust strike pattern," he ordered. "Prioritize remaining orbital defense platforms." Acknowledged. High above the atmosphere, the last remnants of Vosh defensive systems attempted to activate. Too late. Human ships shifted position, firing controlled bursts that disabled each platform before it could fully come online. Not destroyed, neutralized, left intact, but useless. "They're dismantling everything," another voice whispered from the planet's surface. "Piece by piece," because that was the point. Not annihilation, demonstration. 6 hours of war had already proven what humanity could do. Now they were showing what they would choose to do, and the difference between those two things was far more terrifying. Within hours, the entire military infrastructure of the Vosh Concordat's home system was gone. Not erased, not burned to ash, but rendered powerless. Shipyards silent, weapons offline, command networks severed. A civilization that had once relied on its strength now had none. On the bridge, the final report came in. "All primary targets neutralized," the tactical officer said. "No civilian casualties detected." Derek exhaled slowly. "Good." He turned slightly. "Open a channel." Moments later, the transmission spread across the planet. Every frequency, every receiver, every system still capable of listening. "This is Admiral Derek Stone of the Earth Defense Fleet." His voice carried across an entire world. Calm, controlled, unmistakable. "The fighting is over." Below, in cities and command centers and fractured council chambers, Vosh listened, because they had no choice. "You had an opportunity to take responsibility for your actions," Derek continued. "You chose not to. No anger, no raised tone, just fact. We have now removed your ability to repeat those actions. A pause, long enough for the meaning to settle. For the record, he added, we could have done more. On the surface, systems flickered. Some failed entirely, not from attack, from realization. We could have destroyed your cities. We could have wiped your species from existence. Each statement was delivered with the same calm precision. No threat, no exaggeration, just truth. But we didn't. Silence. Total. Because now they understood, not just what had been done, but what had been allowed. We do not kill civilians, Derek said. A simple statement, a defining one. We do not punish the innocent for the crimes of the guilty. Another pause. Then, but do not mistake restraint for weakness. The words settled heavier than anything before them, because they had seen the alternative. They had seen what humanity was capable of when it chose to act without limits. And now, they were seeing what it chose instead. You will surrender every individual involved in the Curry genocide, Derek said. The demand returned. Clear, unchanged. You will provide full documentation of your actions. Another pause. Shorter this time. You have 6 hours. Not 12. 6. The difference was not explained. It didn't need to be. Refuse, he continued, and we will begin dismantling your civilian infrastructure. Across the planet, systems flickered again. Power grids, water systems, communication networks, all vulnerable, all exposed. We will not kill your people, Derek said. A promise, cold, precise. But we will send your civilization back to the Stone Age. The transmission held for a moment longer, then ended. No follow-up, no negotiation, just silence. On the surface, panic began to spread. Not chaos, not yet, but something deeper, something more controlled. Fear, because for the first time, the Vosh understood exactly where the line was, and exactly what would happen if they crossed it again. Above them, the human fleet remained in orbit, still, silent, watching, not as conquerors, not as destroyers, but as something far more unsettling. Judges, waiting for a verdict that had already been decided, unless the Vosh chose to change it. The council chamber did not erupt this time. There were no overlapping voices, no frantic demands, no attempts to reassert control through volume or authority. There was only silence, heavy, absolute, because everything that could be argued had already been decided. The data still hovered in the center of the chamber. Fleet losses, infrastructure collapse, command network failures, all of it confirmed, all of it undeniable. 600 warships reduced to debris in less than a day. 3 centuries of military dominance erased in hours. And above it all, 47 human ships, holding orbit like they owned the space. No one spoke at first, because no one had a solution, not a real one. We cannot comply, one of the council members finally said, though even they seemed unsure as the words formed. If we surrender those involved, we expose ourselves to internal instability. No one responded, because that was no longer the primary concern. The alternative, the elder said quietly, is extinction of function. All attention shifted to them, not extinction of species, not annihilation, something worse. The slow dismantling of everything that made the Concordat what it was. Power grids, infrastructure, communication, order, gone, systematically, deliberately, until nothing remained but survival. Primitive, fragile, vulnerable. They have already demonstrated capability, the elder continued, and restraint. That word lingered. Restraint. It had seemed like mercy at first. Now it felt like control. They are not acting randomly, the elder said. They are enforcing a boundary. A boundary they have no right to define. Another member snapped, though the force behind it was fading. Then stop them, the elder replied. Silence answered, because no one could. Across the wider galactic network, the situation was no longer contained. News had spread, not through official channels, through observation, through intercepted transmissions, through the simple, undeniable fact that an entire military power had just collapsed. The Galactic Council convened in emergency session. For the first time in centuries, every major species attended, not out of obligation, out of necessity. This cannot stand, Representative Corvin of the Dreth Collective declared, his voice cutting sharply through the chamber. A non-member species has launched an unprovoked assault against a recognized power. If we allow this, we undermine the entire foundation of interstellar law. Murmurs followed. Agreement, concern, fear. They did not act unprovoked. Another voice countered. All attention shifted. Reth, one of the few who had maintained communication with humanity before their isolation, one of the few who understood them, even slightly. They presented evidence of genocide, Reth continued, evidence that has now been independently verified. The chamber flickered, because that word, genocide, changed everything. It was an internal matter, Corvin insisted. The decline of the Kari was not natural. Reth cut in, sharp, precise, final. They were being exterminated. Silence followed, because no one could deny it anymore. The data had been shared, analyzed, confirmed. The truth was no longer in question, only the response. Even so, another representative said carefully, the humans had no authority to act. Reth turned toward them. And who did? He asked. No one answered, because the answer was obvious. No one had acted. No one had intervened. No one had stopped it. We had protocols, Corvin argued weakly. Procedures. Investigations could have been. For 300 years, Reth said, the question cut deeper than any accusation, because it exposed the flaw at the center of everything. Delay. Process. Inaction. Disguised as order. They did what we should have done, Reth said quietly, and they did it without asking permission. That was the real problem. Not the violence. Not the destruction. The independence. The refusal to follow a system that had failed. They used prohibited weapons, another representative added, grasping for something, anything, to regain control of the narrative. Radiation-based systems banned under the Civilized Warfare Accords. Reth didn't hesitate. They never signed those accords. The chamber dimmed, because that, too, was true. Humanity had been absent when those laws were written, absent when those rules were agreed upon, absent when the galaxy decided what was acceptable, and now they had returned, unaffected by those decisions, unbound by those rules, operating under something else entirely, their own code. That is a technicality, Corvin said. No, Reth replied. It is reality. A shift moved through the chamber, subtle, but undeniable, because for the first time, the council wasn't debating whether humanity was wrong. They were debating whether they could do anything about it. And the answer was becoming clear. They are dangerous, one representative said quietly. Yes, Reth agreed. No hesitation, no denial. They are. A pause. Then, they are also predictable. That drew attention, because predictable meant understandable, and understandable meant manageable. They protect their allies, Reth continued. They respond to injustice. They act when others do not. He let that settle. They are not our enemies. Not yet. The implication didn't need to be spoken. What do you propose? Finn asked, his voice lower now, less certain than before. Reth looked around the chamber, at every species, every representative, every system that had relied on stability over action. We acknowledge them, he said, not as members, not as subordinates, not as threats, as equals. The word landed heavily, because it changed everything. They operate outside our structure, Reth continued. So we stop trying to force them into it. A pause. We adapt. Silence followed, not because the idea was rejected, but because it was understood. This was no longer about controlling humanity. It was about surviving alongside them. After a long moment, Finn spoke again. "And the Vosh?" he asked. Reth didn't look away. "They made their choice," he said, "and now they are living with it." Back in Vosh space, the decision came faster than anyone expected. Not because it was easy, because it was inevitable. Coordinator Vesh stood at the center of what remained of the command structure. Dim, unstable, but still intact. "The data is prepared," one of his advisors said. "All records, all personnel involved, identified and contained." Vesh didn't respond immediately, because this was the end of something. Not their species, not their existence, their certainty, their control, their belief that they could act without consequence. "Transmit it," he said finally. The words felt heavier than they should have. "Send everything." Across the system, the data transfer began. Encrypted, complete, unaltered, and in orbit. The human fleet waited, still, silent, watching, until the moment the first packet was received. Then, and only then, they moved. The human fleet did not celebrate. There were no cheers on the bridge of the endless dawn. No visible relief. No sense of victory. Only confirmation. Data integrity verified. The intelligence officer reported. Full transfer complete. No signs of alteration. Admiral Derek Stone gave a single nod. "Cross-check it," he said. "Already in progress." Around him, the crew moved with the same quiet efficiency they had shown since the beginning. No wasted motion, no unnecessary words, because this had never been about winning. It had been about finishing something. Hours later, the analysis returned exactly what they expected. Names, chains of command, authorization logs. Every individual who had played a role in the slow extermination of the Curry. Every decision, every step, every justification, laid bare. "Send it to Ambassador Brooks," Derek said. "Acknowledged." He turned back to the viewport. Below, the Vosh home world still turned. Still intact. Still alive. Because humanity had decided it would remain that way. For now, on the diplomatic station orbiting Curry space. And Brooks stood alone in the observation chamber when the transmission reached her. She didn't open it immediately. For a long moment, she just looked out at the stars. 300 years. That was how long the promise had waited. 3 centuries of memory, of names, of a debt that had never faded. Behind her, the system chimed softly. Incoming data. Complete. Verified. She exhaled once, then turned and activated the display. The files unfolded in layers. Clean. Precise. Final. There was no denial left. No ambiguity. No room for interpretation. She read through the first entries in silence. Then the next. And the next. Until she reached the section she had been looking for. Primary authorization. The moment the decision had been made. The moment a species had been marked for extinction. Her expression didn't change, but something inside it settled. Not satisfaction. Not relief. Something quieter. Something heavier. Closure. "Forward everything to the Council," she said. The system acknowledged instantly. "And to the Curry leadership." Another confirmation. She hesitated, just briefly, then added, "Unfiltered." No edits. No protection. No softening of the truth. They deserve to see it. All of it. Hours later, across Curry space, the first treatments began. Dr. Okoye stood at the center of a medical facility that had once been a place of quiet resignation. Now it was something else. Movement, urgency, hope, stabilization holding. One of the technicians reported, "Genetic repair sequence is integrating." On the table in front of them, a Curry patient lay still, fragile, fading, until, slowly, Color began to return, subtle at first, then stronger. Systems stabilized. Cellular decay halted, reversed. The room held its breath. Then the monitors confirmed it. It's working. The word spread quickly. Through the facility, through the city, through the entire species. The fading was ending. On a nearby balcony, matriarch Sella watched the lights of her world flicker back to life. Beside her, and stood quietly. "You've given us our future back," Sella said softly, and shook her head. "You gave us ours first." Sella turned slightly, her colors shifting with something warmer now. Gratitude, relief, something deeper. "You remembered," she said, and looked out at the horizon. "At 50,000 names carved into stone," she replied. "Yeah." A pause. "We remembered." Below them, the city moved, not like before, not with the slow, fading rhythm of a species preparing to disappear, but with energy, with purpose, with life. For the first time in generations, the Curry were not dying, they were living. Across the galaxy, the impact spread, quietly at first, then unmistakably. The Galactic Council issued its ruling within days. The Vosh Concordat was sanctioned, its leadership dismantled. Those responsible for the genocide were turned over for trial, not because the Council had acted, but because humanity had forced them to. And that truth lingered, uncomfortable, unavoidable. At the same time, something else began to shift. Species that had once kept their distance started reaching out, not to the Council, to humanity. Requests, offers,